The Duke of Corfield had come to the Weatherly ball meaning to leave within the hour, and instead he stood frozen in the dark of the conservatory doorway, watching a woman's whole life come apart in the space of a single overheard sentence. "You cannot mean to actually marry her, Fairfax," a voice was saying, low and amused, from behind the orange trees. "The girl is pleasant enough, I grant you, but pleasant does not settle a man's debts." Everett Ashworth, Duke of Corfield, had not intended to eavesdrop. He had stepped into the cool green quiet only to escape the crush of the ballroom, the endless mothers steering their daughters into his path. Now he did not move, because he had seen, an instant before, the pale figure standing rigid at the far end of the glass room, a young woman in ivory silk, a betrothal ring bright on her hand, one gloved palm pressed flat against her breastbone as though to hold something in. Delphine Weatherly. He knew her by sight as everyone did, the elder daughter of the house, quiet, unfailingly kind, the sort of girl the ton praised and never quite noticed. She had come looking for her betrothed, and she had found him. "I mean to marry her by Michaelmas and be free of it by spring," said the second voice, Fairfax's own, smooth and unbothered. "Her portion clears the worst of what I owe. After that she may keep to the country and rear my heirs while I keep to town. I shall be tender enough at the altar, and after that it hardly signifies. She is grateful. Grateful women give no trouble." There was a soft sound then, a laugh, and the clink of glass, and Everett watched Delphine Weatherly's face in the lamplight, and something in his chest went very still and very cold. He had spent 39 years learning to keep his face shut like a door. He had buried a father, a brother, and a young wife dead of fever within the same 3 winters, and he had come out the other side of grief a man of granite, feared for his silences, courted for his name, loved by no one and expecting nothing else. He had thought himself past the reach of any feeling sharp enough to move him. He was wrong. What he felt, watching that girl absorb her ruin without a sound, was fury clean and enormous, and beneath it unaccountably something that ached. She did not weep. That was what undid him. A weeping woman he could have pitied and passed by. But Delphine Weatherly drew one breath and then another, and lifted her chin by a degree so small only a watching man would catch it, and turned to go, and in turning she saw him standing in the doorway, and understood at once that he had heard every word. For a moment neither of them moved. The shame that crossed her face was terrible to see, not the shame of a woman caught in wrongdoing, but the deeper humiliation of being pitied. Her eyes said, plainly as speech, "Please, not you as well." Everett stepped aside from the doorway to let her pass. But as she came level with him, silk whispering, he found he could not let her walk out into that ballroom alone to smile and dance and pretend, with her betrothed's contempt still ringing in the glass room behind her. So he did a thing he had not done in 5 years. He offered a stranger his arm. "Miss Weatherly," he said quietly, "I believe the next set is forming. Would you do me the honor?" She stared at his arm as though it were a language she had forgotten how to read. "Your Grace, you needn't. I know what you heard." "I heard a fool," Everett said, "mistake a fortune for a burden. Take my arm, Miss Weatherly. Let them look at that instead." Something flickered in her, not hope. She was past hope tonight, but a kind of steadying, as when a person under water feels a hand close on theirs. She laid her fingers on his sleeve. They were trembling, and she could not stop them, and he pretended not to notice and walked her out into the light. The ballroom turned to look, as ballrooms did. The Duke of Corfield did not dance. Everyone knew it. That he should be leading out the elder Weatherly girl plain, portioned, promised to another man, sent a ripple through the room that reached the card tables and the dowager's bench and the corner where Mr. Fairfax had just emerged, flushed with wine and satisfaction, to find his betrothed in another man's hands. Everett danced with her the whole set through. He was not a graceful man, but he was a sure one, and he held her steady when her feet wanted to falter, and he spoke to her in a low voice of nothing at all, the poor quality of the orchestra, the absurd size of the pineapple on the supper table, until on the third turn he won from her something he had not expected, a small, involuntary, watery laugh. There, he said, you see, the world has not ended, it only feels as though it has. He does not know I heard, she said, very low as the figures of the dance drew them close. He will marry me still, he needs the money, and she stopped. I have no reason to refuse him that the world would credit. A broken engagement ruins the woman, not the man. My mother would never recover from the scandal. So you would spend your life, Everett said, married to a man who called your gratitude a convenience to spare your mother a season of whispers. That is how it is done, your grace, she said. You know it is. He did know it. He had watched it done 100 times. And he thought, with the sudden reckless clarity of a man who has spent too long being sensible, that he was tired of how things were done. The set ended. He bowed over her hand and did not release it at once. Miss Weatherly, will you permit me to call upon your father tomorrow? She went white, then pink. Your grace, you cannot mean you have known me a quarter of an hour. I have watched you a great deal longer than that, Everett said, which was true, and which surprised him to hear himself say. I have watched you carry your mother's temper and your sister's frivolity, and this house's affairs on shoulders no one ever thanks. I do not offer out of pity, Miss Weatherly. Pity I could not sustain a week. I offer because I have not in 5 years wished to speak to anyone at a ball, and tonight I did not wish to stop speaking to you. She had no answer to that. She looked at him as though seeing him for the first time, not the Duke of Corfield, the granite man, the marriage prize, but the person inside the name, who had also, she now guessed, buried more than his share and learned to stand very still about it. Tomorrow, she said at last, barely above a breath, you may call tomorrow. He called at 11, but the tale had traveled faster than he had, as tales do, and when he was shown into the Weatherly drawing-room, he found Mr. Fairfax already there, standing over Delphine and her stricken mother, his handsome face blotched with the particular anger of a man who fears he has been caught. Corfield, Fairfax said, too loudly, this is a family matter. You will forgive me if I ask you to withdraw. It is curious you should speak of family, Everett said, unhurried, setting his hat upon a side table, since it was you last night who described the young lady's dowry as the whole of her value to you. I stood in the conservatory doorway. I heard every syllable. Shall I repeat it for her mother, or will you? The room went silent. Mrs. Weatherly's fan stopped. Delphine had gone very still on the sofa, and Everett saw the exact moment her mother turned to look at her, not with reproach, for once, but with a mother's slow, dawning horror at what her child had heard and borne alone. That is a lie, Fairfax said, but his voice cracked on it. Word for word, Everett said mildly, you said grateful women give no trouble. You said you would be tender enough at the altar. You said the rest hardly signified. He let each phrase fall like a coin on a table. I have an excellent memory, Mr. Fairfax. It has been the ruin of pleasanter men than you. Fairfax looked from face to face and found no ally in any of them. Whatever debts had driven him, they would not be settled here now, and he was gentleman enough, at least, to know when a room had turned against him past recovery. He made some choked remark about being maligned and misjudged, and he took up his gloves and left, and the door closed behind him, and that was the end of him. He did marry, in time, an heiress from the north who never learned to laugh, which those who had known the whole story privately felt to be a fitting sentence. In the quiet he left behind, Mrs. Weatherly began to weep, and Delphine went to her, and Everett stood by the window and let them be, until at last the mother mastered herself and looked up at him with red eyes and asked the only question that remained. "And you, your grace," she said, "why are you here?" "To ask your daughter to marry me," Everett said. "If she will have me. Not to rescue her, she has proved she needs no rescuing. To marry her because I find, at 39, that I should like to come home to someone, and I cannot imagine a better someone than a woman who could hear the worst of the world spoken aloud and answer it by lifting her chin." He turned to Delphine. "I will not press you. If you say no, I will see the story dies quietly and your name is untouched, and I will trouble you no further. But I would rather you said yes." Delphine rose. She crossed the room to him and stood close and looked up into the granite face that was not. She had begun to understand granite at all, but a door someone had learned to keep shut against a world that had hurt him too. "You said you had watched me," she said softly. "May I tell you what I saw last night in the doorway?" "Tell me." "I saw a man who could have pretended not to hear, who could have walked away and left me to my dignity, which is what most men would call kindness, and instead you gave me your arm so that I should not have to be alone in it." Her eyes filled and did not spill. "I have been the useful one my whole life, Your Grace, the one who gives no trouble. You are the first person who ever looked at me as though I were the fortune and not the price of one." "Because you are," Everett said. They were married in the autumn, quietly in the small church on the Corfield lands, with no crush and no crowd and no orchestra playing badly. Delphine wore no ivory silk. She wore a soft dove gray that suited her, and Everett found he could not look away from her all through the service, which the old rector remarked upon afterward as the first time in living memory the Duke had been seen to smile in church. They did not fall in love the way the poets described it, all at once and blinding. They fell as two people fall who have each been alone a long time and have stopped expecting company, slowly, disbelievingly, with a kind of gratitude that had nothing servile in it. She learned the grief he never spoke of, the wife and the brother and the father, and did not try to mend it, only sat with him in it, which was better. He learned the whole long history of her being useful and unthanked, and set himself, quietly and for the rest of his life, to thanking her. Years on, at a ball much like the one where it began, a young woman new to society asked the Duchess of Corfield how she had ever caught so cold and forbidding a man. And Delphine, watching her husband cross the room to bring her a glass she had not asked for, only because he liked to, smiled and said, "He was not cold. He was only waiting, as I was, to be seen. We happened to see each other on the same night." The Duke reached her side. He put the glass in her hand and his other hand at the small of her back and bent his dark head close to hers. "You are telling the doorway story again," he murmured. "They always want the doorway story." "It is a good story," Everett said, and looked at her the way he had looked at her that first night, as though she were the whole of the fortune and none of the price. "Though I have always thought the best part comes after, the part where I was right,